In one of the city's finest restaurants, where only the wealthy and powerful gathered, a plainly dressed black waiter with warm brown skin stood beside a table of elegant young women. He listened quietly as they reviewed the menu, his posture respectful and patient. Then one of them, a stunning brunette in designer clothes, switched to French mid-sentence. Her tone dripped with mockery, certain he would not understand a single word. His response came in perfect French, brief, flawless, unshaken. The table fell silent. Who was this man? Darius Parker, a black single dad, moved through the dining room with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The restaurant hummed with low conversation and the soft clink of crystal glasses. Chandeliers cast warm light over white tablecloths and polished silverware. He carried a leather-bound menu under one arm and kept his expression neutral, the way he always did during the evening shift. At 35, he had learned to make himself invisible in rooms like this. As a black man serving wealthy people, it was easier that way. He approached table 12, where 4 young women sat laughing over champagne flutes. Their jewelry caught the light. Their dresses looked expensive, the kind that required dry cleaning and careful handling. One of them, a brunette with sharp cheekbones and perfectly styled hair, glanced up as he arrived. Her smile was polite but distant, the kind reserved for people who served rather than sat. Darius nodded once and pulled out his notepad. "Good evening. Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes?" His voice was calm and professional. He had said these words so many times they came automatically now. The blonde across from the brunette leaned forward and whispered something that made the others giggle. The brunette waved a hand dismissively and looked back at Darius. "We're ready," she said. Her name was Victoria Reynolds, though Darius did not know that yet. She was 27, beautiful in the way that money and confidence made people beautiful, and she was used to getting what she wanted. Victoria opened her menu and scanned the appetizers. "I'll start with the oysters," she said, then glanced at her friends with a faint smile. One of them, a redhead named Jessica, smirked back. Something unspoken passed between them, a private joke that Darius was not meant to understand. Then Victoria switched languages mid-sentence. Her French was smooth and deliberate, each word enunciated clearly. The other women at the table stifled laughter. Jessica covered her mouth with one hand, her shoulders shaking. Another woman, a tall brunette named Lauren, leaned back in her chair and watched Darius with open amusement. They were waiting for him to fumble, to ask her to repeat herself, to call over the manager in embarrassment. It was a test, and they expected him to fail. Darius did not flinch. He did not look confused or uncomfortable. He simply met Victoria's eyes and replied in the same language, his accent flawless and unhurried. "Compro, mademoiselle." The laughter stopped. Jessica's hand dropped from her mouth. Lauren sat up straighter, her expression shifting from amusement to surprise. Victoria stared at him, her lips parting slightly, as if she wanted to say something but could not find the words. The air around the table changed, became heavier, uncertain. Darius kept his pen poised above the notepad, his face betraying nothing. "Anything else?" he asked, this time in English. Victoria blinked once, then twice. She glanced at her friends, who were now looking at her instead of him. The joke had backfired. The man they had assumed was beneath them, someone they could mock without consequence, had just revealed himself to be something other than what they expected. "No," Victoria said finally, her voice quieter now. "That's all." Darius nodded and wrote down the order. He did not smile or acknowledge the shift in the room. He simply closed his notepad and moved to the next woman at the table. "And for you, miss," Jessica ordered quickly, stumbling over her words slightly. Lauren did the same. The fourth woman, a petite blonde named Melissa, barely spoke above a whisper. The dynamic had changed. They were no longer laughing. They were watching him, reassessing. When Darius finished taking their orders, he stepped back and gave a small, professional bow. "I'll have these out shortly," he said, then turned and walked toward the kitchen. He did not look back. He did not need to. He could feel their eyes on him. the weight of their confusion and curiosity pressing against his shoulders. In the kitchen, the noise was louder. Pans clattered. Chefs barked orders. Darius handed the slip to the expediter and leaned against the counter for a moment, letting the tension drain from his body. He did not enjoy moments like that, but they happened more often than he would have liked. People looked at him and saw only the uniform, the apron, the tray in his hands. They did not see anything else. He thought briefly of his son Malik, a 6-year-old black boy with warm brown skin and soft curls, probably finishing dinner right now at his grandmother's house. Malik would be asking when his dad was coming home, wondering if there would be time for a bedtime story. Darius checked his watch. Another 4 hours until his shift ended. 4 more hours of smiling politely, taking orders, pretending not to notice when people like Victoria Reynolds tried to humiliate him for sport. He pushed off the counter and returned to the floor. The rest of the dining room was busy, filled with couples celebrating anniversaries and business executives discussing deals over wine. Darius moved between tables, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, doing the work that kept him and Malik fed and housed. It was not glamorous. It was not what he had imagined his life would look like when he was younger, but it was enough. At table 12, Victoria sat in silence. Her friends had resumed talking, but she was not listening. She stared at the silverware in front of her, her mind turning over what had just happened. She had been so certain, so sure that he would not understand, that he would be embarrassed, that she would have a funny story to tell later. Instead, she was the one left off balance. She did not know his name yet. She did not know that he went home every night to a small apartment in Queens, or that he read picture books to his son until Malik fell asleep. She did not know anything about him except that he spoke French and that she had underestimated him completely. The appetizers arrived within 15 minutes. Darius placed the oysters in front of Victoria with the same calm efficiency he had shown earlier. He set down plates for Jessica, Lauren, and Melissa without speaking, then stepped back and clasped his hands behind him. "Is everything to your liking?" Victoria looked down at her plate. The oysters were arranged perfectly on crushed ice, garnished with lemon wedges and mignonette sauce. There was nothing to criticize. She picked up her fork and nodded once. "Fine," she said. Darius left the table. Victoria watched him go, her jaw tight. The conversation around her had shifted. Jessica was talking about some party next weekend, and Lauren was scrolling through her phone, but Victoria could not focus on any of it. The humiliation still burned in her chest, quiet but persistent. She had made a fool of herself, and worse, she had done it in front of her friends. She needed to regain control. She needed to remind herself that she was still the one with power here, that he was still just a waiter, and that speaking French did not change the fundamental reality of their positions. When Darius returned to check on them, she was ready. "Actually," Victoria said, looking up at him with a bright smile that did not reach her eyes, "I'd like to make a few changes to my main course." Darius stopped beside the table and pulled out his notepad. "Of course. What would you like?" Victoria leaned back in her chair and crossed her legs. She spoke slowly, deliberately, as if she were dictating a letter to a secretary. "I want the filet mignon cooked medium rare, not rare. And I want the peppercorn sauce on the side, not on top. Also, I'd like roasted asparagus instead of the green beans, but only the tips, not the stems. And I want them lightly salted, not heavily. Can you do that?" Darius wrote nothing down. He simply looked at her and nodded. "Anything else?" Victoria felt a flicker of irritation. He should have been writing this down. How could he possibly remember all of it? She decided to push further. "Yes. I also want a side of mashed potatoes, but I want them made with butter and cream. No garlic, no chives. And I want them smooth, not chunky. And bring me a glass of the Chateau Margaux, the 2010 vintage, not the 2012. Jessica glanced at Victoria, her eyebrows raised slightly. Lauren sat down her phone and watched with renewed interest. Even Melissa, who had been quiet all evening, looked up from her plate. They could sense what Victoria was doing. She was testing him, trying to overwhelm him with details, waiting for him to crack. Darius stood there, hands at his sides, his expression unchanged. "Understood," he said. Then he turned to Jessica. "And for you, miss, any changes?" Jessica blinked, caught off guard. No, I'm good. Darius moved to Lauren, then Melissa. Neither of them requested changes. When he finished, he gave a small nod and walked away without writing down a single word. Victoria watched him go, her frustration mounting. He had not asked her to repeat anything. He had not looked confused or uncertain. He had simply listened and left. "What are you doing?" Jessica asked, leaning closer to Victoria. Her voice was low, amused. "Are you seriously trying to trip him up?" Victoria picked up her champagne glass and took a sip. "I'm just making sure my order is correct," she said. "Is that a crime?" Lauren smirked. "You're being ridiculous. He clearly knows what he's doing." Victoria did not respond. She stared at the entrance to the kitchen, waiting. 20 minutes passed. The dining room grew busier. Other tables received their entree. Victoria's irritation deepened with each passing moment. She tapped her nails against the tablecloth, checked her phone, glanced around the room. Her friends had returned to their conversation, but she could not join in. All she could think about was whether Darius would get the order right. When he finally emerged from the kitchen, he was carrying a large tray balanced on one hand. He approached the table with the same unhurried confidence as before. He sat down Victoria's plate first. The filet mignon was perfectly cooked, medium rare, with the peppercorn sauce in a small dish on the side. The asparagus tips were arranged neatly, lightly salted, no stems. The mashed potatoes were smooth and creamy. The wine glass sat beside the plate, filled with deep red liquid. Darius stepped back and looked at Victoria. Then he spoke, reciting her order, word for word. Filet mignon, medium rare, peppercorn sauce on the side. Roasted asparagus tips, lightly salted, no stems. Mashed potatoes with butter and cream. No garlic, no chives, smooth texture. Chateau Margaux, 2010 vintage. He had not missed a single detail. He had not confused any part of it. He had repeated it back to her in the exact sequence she had given it, as if he had recorded her voice and played it back. Victoria stared at him, her mouth slightly open. Jessica and Lauren exchanged glances. Melissa set down her fork and watched Darius with something close to admiration. "Is this correct?" Darius asked. Victoria looked down at her plate. Everything was exactly as she had ordered. There was nothing to complain about, nothing to criticize. She felt the ground shift beneath her, the careful superiority she had built around herself beginning to crack. "Yes," she said quietly, "it's correct." Darius nodded and moved on to serve the others. The conversation at the table did not resume immediately. Jessica cut into her steak in silence. Lauren sipped her wine without commenting. Melissa glanced at Victoria, then looked away. They were no longer laughing. They were no longer treating Darius like part of the furniture. Something had shifted, and Victoria could feel it in the air between them. She picked up her fork and knife, but did not eat. Her appetite had disappeared. All she could think about was how wrong she had been, how badly she had miscalculated. This man was not what she had thought he was. He was not someone she could dismiss or mock or condescend to. He had proven that twice now, and she hated him for it. But more than that, she hated herself. The meal continued. Darius returned periodically to refill water glasses and clear plates. He did not speak unless spoken to. He did not acknowledge the tension at the table. He simply did his job with the same quiet professionalism he had shown all night. Victoria barely touched her food. She pushed the asparagus around her plate and took small sips of wine, her mind elsewhere. Finally, she could not stand it anymore. She excused herself from the table and stood smoothing down her dress. "I need to use the restroom," she said to no one in particular. Jessica nodded absently. Lauren did not look up. Victoria walked away quickly, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The restroom was at the far end of the restaurant, down a narrow hallway lined with framed black and white photographs. The corridor was quieter than the dining room, insulated from the noise and chatter. Victoria walked quickly, her arms crossed over her chest. She needed a moment alone, a moment to collect herself and rebuild the composure that had been stripped away. Halfway down the hall, she heard a voice. It was low and soft, coming from an alcove near the staff entrance. She slowed her steps and glanced over. Darius stood with his back to her, a phone pressed to his ear. His posture was different now, less rigid, more relaxed. He was speaking in a tone she had not heard before. "Hey, buddy," Darius said gently. "Did you finish your dinner?" There was a short silence. Victoria stopped walking. She knew she should keep going, that this was none of her business, but she could not move. Something in his voice held her in place. "I know," Darius continued. "I'm sorry I'm not there, but Grandma made your favorite, right? The mac and cheese." He listened again, then laughed softly. It was a warm sound, full of affection. "That's my boy. Listen, I'll be home soon, okay? And when I get there, we'll read that book you like, the one about the dragon. Does that sound good?" Victoria's chest tightened. She had not expected this. She had not expected to hear tenderness in his voice, to hear him speak to someone with such care and patience. She leaned against the wall, hidden from view, and listened. "I love you too, Malik," Darius said quietly. "Be good for Grandma. I'll see you soon." He ended the call and stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in his hand. Then he slipped it into his pocket and took a deep breath, as if steeling himself to return to the dining room. Victoria watched him walk past the alcove and disappear around the corner, unaware that she had been there at all. She stood frozen in the hallway. Her hands were trembling. The anger and frustration that had filled her moments ago had evaporated, replaced by something heavier, something she did not want to name. Shame, regret, a sudden acute awareness of how small and petty she had been. This Innit, the one she had tried to humiliate, the one she had tested and dismissed, was a father. He was raising a child alone. He worked long hours in a job that people like her looked down on, and he did it so he could go home and read bedtime stories to a 6-year-old boy who missed him. She thought of her own life, the luxury and ease of it, the way she had never once had to worry about how she would pay for dinner or whether she could afford childcare. She thought of the emptiness that sat at the center of her world, the relationships that felt hollow, the friends who were more interested in appearances than substance. She had everything, and yet she had nothing. Victoria pushed off the wall and continued down the hallway to the restroom. She locked herself in a stall and sat down, her head in her hands. She did not cry. She was too stunned for that. But she felt something break inside her, some carefully constructed wall that had kept her separate from people like Darius. People she had convinced herself were beneath her. She had been wrong about him, about everything. Victoria stood at the sink and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was familiar but strange. Same carefully applied makeup, same expensive dress, same confident posture she had practiced since she was a teenager, but something behind her eyes had changed. She looked smaller somehow, less certain. She turned on the faucet and let cold water run over her hands, then pressed her wet fingers against her temples. The coolness helped, but it did not erase what she had heard in the hallway. She thought about Malik, 6 years old, waiting for his father to come home, waiting for a bedtime story about a dragon. She thought about Darius's voice, the way it had softened when he spoke to his son, the way he had apologized for not being there. How many nights had he done this? How many shifts had he worked while his child waited at home? And how many people like her had treated him as if he were invisible, as if his life did not matter simply because he wore an apron and carried trays? Victoria dried her hands slowly, folding the paper towel into smaller and smaller squares. She did not want to go back to the table. She did not want to face her friends and pretend that nothing had happened, but she could not stay in the restroom forever. She dropped the towel in the trash and walked back out into the hallway. The dining room noise hit her as soon as she emerged. Laughter and conversation, the clatter of dishes, the ambient hum of wealth and comfort. She made her way back to table 12, her steps slower than before. Jessica looked up as she approached and smiled. "You okay? You were gone for a while." Victoria sat down and picked up her napkin. "I'm fine," she said. The lie came easily, the way lies always did. She glanced at her plate. The food had grown cold. She picked up her fork and took a small bite of the filet mignons, but it tasted like nothing. She chewed mechanically and swallowed, her mind elsewhere. Lauren was talking about some art gallery opening next week. Melissa was scrolling through her phone again, laughing at something on the screen. Jessica refilled her wine glass and asked Victoria if she wanted more. Victoria shook her head. She felt like an outsider at her own table, watching these women she had known for years and realizing how little they actually knew about each other. They talked about parties and vacations and who was dating whom, but they never talked about anything real. They never talked about struggle or sacrifice or what it meant to work for something instead of simply having it handed to you. Darius returned to clear their plates. He moved efficiently, stacking dishes on his tray without making eye contact. Victoria watched his hands. They were clean and strong, his dark brown hands the hands of someone who worked hard. She wondered what else those hands did when he was not here. Did they help Malik with homework? Did they tie shoelaces and wipe away tears? Did they hold bedtime stories and turn pages gently so the boy could see the pictures? "Can I get you anything else?" Darius asked. His voice was neutral, professional. He was looking at the table as a whole, not at her specifically. Jessica shook her head. "Just the check, I think." Darius nodded and walked away. Victoria felt a sudden urgent need to say something, to do something, to somehow acknowledge what she had overheard, but she did not know how. She had spent her entire life building walls around herself, constructing a persona of confidence and superiority that kept people at a distance. Tearing down those walls even for a moment felt impossible. The conversation at the table shifted to plans for the weekend. Someone suggested going to the Hamptons. Someone else mentioned a new club that had just opened downtown. Victoria nodded along, but did not contribute. She kept glancing toward the kitchen, waiting for Darius to return. When he finally came back with the check, he placed it in the center of the table on a small silver tray. Jessica reached for it immediately. "I'll get this," she said, pulling out her credit card. Victoria's hand shot out and stopped her. "No," she said. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. Jessica looked at her in surprise. "Let me," Victoria added, softer this time. "Please." Jessica hesitated, then shrugged and put her card back in her purse. "Okay, if you insist." Victoria pulled the leather folder toward her and opened it. The total was $286. She reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet, then extracted 5 crisp $100 bills. She placed them in the folder without looking at the receipt. Jessica noticed immediately. "That's way too much," she said, leaning closer. "The bill is only like $300. You're leaving a $200 tip." Victoria closed the folder. "I know," she said. Lauren raised her eyebrows. "Are you serious right now?" Victoria did not respond. She reached into her purse again and pulled out a pen and a small card she kept for networking events. On the back of the card, she wrote carefully, her handwriting neat and deliberate. When she finished, she slipped the card into the folder with the cash and closed it again. Then she stood up and smoothed down her dress. "I'm ready to go," she said. Her friends exchanged glances, but did not argue. They gathered their coats and purses and followed Victoria toward the exit. As they passed the host stand, Victoria glanced back one more time. Darius was across the room delivering drinks to another table. He did not see her leave. He did not see the folder sitting on table 12 with $500 inside. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp. The city stretched out around them, alive with lights and movement. Jessica flagged down a taxi while Lauren and Melissa discussed which bar they wanted to hit next. Victoria stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the restaurant's elegant facade. The windows glowed warmly from inside. People were still eating, still laughing, still living their comfortable lives without ever thinking about the people who made those lives possible. "You coming?" Jessica called from the taxi. The door was open, waiting. Victoria turned and shook her head. "I think I'm going to walk for a bit," she said. Lauren frowned. "Walk? In those heels?" Victoria glanced down at her shoes. They were expensive and uncomfortable, designed for looking good rather than moving. "I'll be fine," she said. "I'll catch up with you later." Jessica looked like she wanted to argue, but the taxi driver was getting impatient. "Okay," she said finally. "Text me when you get home." Victoria nodded. The taxi pulled away, carrying her friends toward whatever club they had decided on. Victoria watched it disappear into traffic, then turned and started walking in the opposite direction. She did not have a destination in mind. She just needed to move to be alone with her thoughts. She walked slowly, her heels clicking against the pavement. The streets were busy with people heading home from dinner or out to bars. Couples walked hand in hand. Groups of friends laughed and took selfies. Victoria moved through them like a ghost, unseen and untouched. She thought about the note she had written on the back of the card. It had taken her several tries to get the words right, to say what she wanted to say without sounding condescending or patronizing. The final version had been simple, direct, honest. Thank you for reminding me that a person's worth is not measured by their position. She did not know if Darius would read it. She did not know if it would mean anything to him, but she had needed to write it, needed to acknowledge what she had learned tonight, needed to somehow make amends for the cruelty she had shown him. Back at the restaurant, Darius returned to table 12 to collect the check. He picked up the leather folder and opened it, expecting to see a credit card. Instead, he found 5 $100 bills and a small white card. He stared at the cash for a moment, confused. The bill had been $286. This was almost double that. He picked up the card and turned it over. The front had Victoria's name and contact information embossed in elegant script. The back had a handwritten note in black ink. Darius read it once, then twice, his expression unchanging. Then he folded the card carefully and slipped it into his apron pocket along with the cash. He cleared the rest of the table and carried the dishes back to the kitchen. The other servers were busy with their own tables, shouting orders and grabbing plates. Darius moved through the chaos quietly, adding the dishes to the wash station. Then he pulled out his phone and checked the time. 3 more hours until his shift ended. 3 more hours until he could go home. He thought about Malik, probably asleep by now in his grandmother's guest room. He thought about the dragon book, waiting on the nightstand, the one they had been reading together for the past week. He thought about how Malik's face would light up tomorrow morning when Darius walked through the door. The tip Victoria had left would cover groceries for 2 weeks. It would pay for Malik's after-school program for the next month. It would buy new shoes, since Malik had grown out of his old ones. It would ease the constant financial pressure that sat on Darius's shoulders like a weight he could never fully set down. He did not know why Victoria had left such a generous tip. He did not know that she had overheard his phone call, or that she had spent the rest of the evening drowning in guilt and self-reflection. He only knew that sometimes, for reasons he would never understand, people surprised him. They showed him kindness when he expected nothing. They saw him when he had spent so long being invisible. Darius tucked the money deeper into his apron and returned to the dining room. Table 15 needed water refills. Table 9 was ready to order dessert. Table 3 wanted the check. He moved from table to table with the same quiet professionalism he always showed, the same careful attention to detail that had impressed Victoria and her friends earlier that evening. The rest of the shift passed without incident. When midnight finally came, Darius clocked out and changed into his street clothes in the staff room. He said goodnight to the other servers and walked out into the cool, light air. The subway station was 2 blocks away. He took the stairs down into the underground and waited on the platform with a handful of other late-night commuters. The train arrived with a screech of brakes and a rush of stale air. Darius found a seat near the back and leaned his head against the window. His reflection stared back at him, tired and worn, but still here, still standing. He closed his eyes and let the rhythm of the train rock him gently. In his pocket, Victoria's note rested against the bills she had left behind. He did not know her story. He did not know about the shame she felt or the realization she had come to in that hallway. He did not know that she was walking through the city right now, her feet aching in expensive heels, thinking about her own empty life, and wondering how she had become the kind of person who would mock a stranger for sport. All he knew was that tomorrow he would wake up early and make Malik breakfast. He would read him the next chapter of the Dragon Book. He would take him to the park if the weather was nice. He would continue doing what he had always done, raising his son with love and patience, and the steady belief that hard work and decency mattered more than money or status or the opinions of people who did not know him. Victoria finally hailed a taxi an hour later, her feet screaming in protest. She gave the driver her address and leaned back against the seat, watching the city blur past the window. She felt lighter than she had in months, maybe years. Something had shifted inside her, something fundamental and permanent. She did not know what she would do with this new awareness, this sudden understanding of how small and selfish she had been. But she knew she could not go bend to the person she had been before tonight. The taxi pulled up in front of her building, a luxury high-rise with a doorman and marble floors. Victoria paid the driver and walked inside. The doorman greeted her by name. The elevator carried her up to the 23rd floor. Her apartment was exactly as she had left it that morning, pristine and expensive, and utterly, devastatingly empty. She kicked off her heels and walked to the window. The city stretched out below her. Millions of lights and millions of windows, each one representing a life she knew nothing about. People like Darius working late shifts and coming home tired. People like Malik waiting for their parents to tuck them in. People living real lives, messy and difficult and beautiful in ways her own life had never been. Victoria pressed her hand against the glass and stared out at the darkness. She could not undo what she had done tonight. She could not take back the mockery or the condescension or the casual cruelty, but she could change. She could be better. She could remember that every person she met, regardless of their occupation or appearance, carried their own struggles and their own stories and their own quiet dignity. It was not much, but it was a start. Across the city, in a small apartment in Queens, Darius Parker unlocked his front door and stepped inside. The lights were off. His mother-in-law had left a note on the kitchen counter saying Malik had gone to bed at 8:30. Darius walked quietly down the hallway and pushed open his son's bedroom door. Malik was asleep, one arm flung over his head, his mouth slightly open. The dragon book lay on the nightstand where Darius had left it that morning. Darius sat down on the edge of the bed and watched his son breathe, steady and full. He reached out and brushed a small curl of Malik's hair from his forehead. The boy stirred but did not wake. "I'm home, buddy," Darius whispered. "I'm home." He stood and walked back to the door, leaving it open just a crack the way Malik liked it. Then he went to the kitchen and made himself a sandwich, ate it standing at the counter, and finally allowed himself to feel the exhaustion that had been building all day. Tomorrow would be another shift, another day of serving people who might see him or might look right through him. Another day of balancing work and fatherhood and the constant grinding challenge of making ends meet. But tonight, he had $500 in his pocket and a note that reminded him he was seen, that his life mattered, that someone had noticed. It was enough for now. It was enough.